So the latest updates for this meal planner app, which right now I'm saying, hey, this is my day 3 diary. In fact, I'm lying again. I've got a newborn in the house. I've actually been just kind of finding time whenever I can over the past week or whatever. It's been an hour here, an hour there kind of thing. So it's been roughly though a day of work probably. So this is what I've basically been working on is um, the kind of the core UI UX of the create meal plan flow, user flow. So basically, this is going to be a mobile app. So these are placeholder groups. This top nav and bottom nav bar. I'm yet to fill those out, but I've just got this kind of green wireframe placeholder for now. But the main kind of functionality is click start. You can select different cuisines. I always get that wrong. And say if you've got any dietary restrictions, boom, and say how lazy you're feeling. That's going to kind of give you a mix of recipes that are predominantly based, less than a certain time limit. And then you generate recipes and you get this TikTok style feed where you can kind of scroll through recipes that you've been given and you can either accept them, kind of add them to your meal plan or, well, actually, I don't even need this cross. Now that I'm recording this live, this cross is kind of redundant because you just skip over the ones. So I'm kind of designing as I go here. I haven't mocked up all these pages in Figma. If you saw some of the previous videos, this is as much mock-ups as I've got. These kind of like hand-drawn wireframes that I did with an iPad pencil. So I'm now basically just designing live in Bubble. One of the beauties of Bubble, you can in fact design straight in Bubble. I wouldn't go so far as to say I recommend that. I think there's a big upside to designing in Figma, and I kind of experiment. This time I'm doing it straight in Bubble. If I was going to start over, I might do it in Figma first. It can be a little bit faster, but at any rate, so this is basically as far as I've got. Just some UI. So I just want to kind of give a little insight into all of the pieces that have gone into this. So firstly, in terms of the color palette here, I'm kind of going with these greens and this orange is kind of my main like highlight colors. And I believe I wasn't really keeping notes, but I think I used this tool to generate those colors, which is I showed as well in one of the previous diaries. So this is quite a cool tool that lets you create a color palette for your app. The other part is the typography. I use this fontpair.co. They've got this font generator. They give you fonts, 2 different fonts that work well together. So it kind of works like colors where you can just like generate stuff. So I actually went with this Francais text. I didn't go with Ferrago. I went with Open Sans, which is another kind of sans serif. So looking very clean, modern font. And that's what I have in my app is this is the Francais, and then kind of like the body text is this Open Sans. So in terms of this UI UX, a couple of kind of interesting things here. One is probably just the navigation itself. So this create plan group contains all of my onboarding steps. This guy, by the way, is from this website here, getillustrations.com. They've got a great deal. You just get like thousands of illustrations for a one-time fee. And they had a lot of food related stuff. So I just bit the bullet and bought it because they look really cool. And I'll chuck an affiliate link as well in the description if you want to help me out and you're interested in that tool, then purchase it through the affiliate link. That would be greatly appreciated. What else? Yeah, so the navigation here. So this create plan group, what I basically have is a navigation based on URL paths, not URL parameters. So Eli Beachy, who is just a fantastic bubbler who I've had the pleasure of working with on a few different projects. He released a video with pro no coders showing how to use this navigation system using URL paths. So this is the page path. This is the name of the page. And this is an additional path, this number that I put on the end. In fact, no, this is the page index. And these two are additional paths that I've added. And the benefit of using a system like this is that the user can use the back button to cycle through, and your URLs look very clean. You don't have these kind of ugly, and tab equals, create kind of stuff. The URLs themselves look very clean. So that's the advantage of using this method. So how that actually works for each of these onboarding groups, they, as you might predict, are set to collapse when they're not visible. And they are going to be visible when this variable, which contains a number, is equal to, whatever their corresponding step is. So step 2, step 3. And you might be wondering, what do you mean variable? Like, there is no such thing as variables in Bubble. That is true. So we create our own. This is a method that I picked up working at AirDev. This is what is used within the Canvas system. Create a hidden pop-up. So this pop-up, you never display to your users. It only holds groups, and those groups have a data source, like, for example, the step, the step that we are on in terms of the onboarding. And that group is the variable. So this is kind of the naming convention is var and then the name of the variable. And then that lets you find them very easily, of course. And the benefit of doing this is that we're adhering to the dry principle. So we're not repeating ourselves. So instead of in each one of these groups writing an individual condition here where I say get data from page URL, and well, to actually set this up, I would go path and or I would go, no, sorry, I'm actually looking for path segments because I've got more than one. I'm going to get into this in a second, into what this all means. But basically, instead of setting this up individually for each group here, where I may need to update the source in future in all of these groups, I can just point them towards this one variable. So this one variable creates step, which I should have started here. Actually, this is a bit clearer. Is what this group is doing is looking at the URL. It's pulling out the path segments, which is going to return this. So everything basically after the root domain, and you can forget about the version test. So this is one path segment. This is another path segment. This is another path segment. So there's 3 path segments here. So this is going to be returned as a list of texts with this, this section here. And then I'm grabbing the 3rd item in that list, which is going to be this guy here. And that's what I'm then determining which onboarding step I should display. So I set this up once here within this hidden variable, within this hidden pop-up, and then I point all my onboarding groups to that variable. And actually, in this particular case, I'm not duplicating stuff. If I was going to set up this expression, this get data from page URL, if I was to set that up for individually in each of these conditions, rather than pointing to this intermediate variable group, it would still work fine. I wouldn't be repeating myself. The reason why I created a variable is because I can account for when the user lands on this index page and there isn't a there isn't a number in this path. There isn't a path segment corresponding to the step, because I can have a pages loaded and what did I do here actually? Yeah, right. Here it is here. So what it's normally doing is, as I said, looking for item number 3. But if there isn't an item number 3, which is what this condition is saying, if item number 3 is empty, then the data source for the step, like which onboarding step we're on, or which it's not onboarding. I keep saying onboarding because it looks like an onboarding flow. What it actually is a create recipe flow. That's what I should be calling it. When that onboarding step is empty, we are loading by default this number 1. So you're around step number 1. Yeah, if I think that I might demonstrate that so it's a little clearer. Can I do this yet? Can I just populate the debugger? No, it's giving me issues. So what I want to do, I want to bring up the debugger here, and since I am, there we go. Okay, so right now, of course, there isn't a onboarding step path in the URL. However, my create step is having this condition fire, which populates itself, which renders or returns that value number 1. And since all my individual groups here are looking at that variable rather than the URL, this works because each of these groups is looking at that step and saying, look, is the number in that variable my number? If it is, then I'll be displayed, and if it's not, then I won't. And so this works great. And then, of course, as you might expect, this next button, basically, if it's less than a certain number, which is going to be the trigger to kind of exit this onboarding flow, which I'll get to in a minute, then I am triggering a custom event, and I've set this all up so it's easily maintainable. So just follow me for a second and it all makes sense. So I'm triggering a custom event here, passing into that custom event a number, number 1, and that custom event itself is just going to reload the page essentially, and it's going to push into the URL path the value of the current onboarding step, which is of course held in that variable, plus 1 in this case, right? Because I'm going plus current workflows number. That number, of course, is going to be this 1 here. So this 1 is being passed through into this custom event, which is then being fed through into this action. And I'm using arbitrary text so I can write the whole URL here. So I'm going plus that number. And you might go, well, why don't you just go plus 1? Why do you have to do this fancy thing where you're posting basically a variable, a local variable holding this number? Well, it's because I also want to have a back button. And when I'm using the back button, I'm going to trigger exactly the same custom event because that's going to be really easy to maintain. And this time I'm just going to use -1, right? So that I can go start or back, next or back, right? And that just makes things easy to maintain rather than having 2 individual go to page index where I've got this arbitrary text, because then I am repeating myself. If I ever need to change the name of the page here, then I have to change it in 2 different places. Right now, I'd only have to change it in 1. So these are good good kind of practices to get into. So that's page nav in a nutshell. In terms of the UI structure, I have to remind myself here. Yeah, it's a little trick. I found this a little tricky actually to design in the new responsive engine because without going fit height to content, all these groups kind of want to stack up on top of one another, even though they're in a column layout. So that's a little annoying. And there might be a more elegant solution to that. If you have one, I would love to hear it. But basically, yeah, these are all just column layouts, for the text and an image. And this group plan nav down the bottom is just visible no matter which onboarding group we're on. So this next button is kind of always there. And the thing is, it also has next to it a back button, which is going to collapse when it's not visible. I don't need it on all the onboarding steps. I only need it from step 3 and up. And then I got these nice little progress dots, which each just have a small condition on them. Depending on what the step is, then they're going to make themselves a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller. So you get this kind of this effect here, which is quite nice. What else is worth pointing out here? Yeah, I think this isn't too novel. It's just a bunch of, it's just getting this to work in a responsive way. All of these groups are taking up essentially, actually I should be looking at this in mobile mode. It's set to be filling the vertical height. Everything here is set to be filling the vertical height, but up to a certain point. There's no phone that is that, I think, what is it? The iPhone 5, that has like the smallest screen. 6, that's a lie. What am I looking at here? I want the 320 by 568. Right. So that's why I have basically a minimum height here of 568. Because that's the smallest, I believe, the smallest phone size, screen size. So as long as it all looks good at that size and above, I'm happy. Moving on to the more interesting part, which is this ability here to have this kind of TikTok, like you just scroll a little bit and it snaps to the next object. So this is, can be a little fiddly. It was a little fiddly actually to set up. Basically what is being used here is something called scroll snap. So it is some custom CSS. And what it basically means is that when you scroll either on the X axis or the Y axis, the viewport will snap to the next item if the user scrolls a sufficient amount. So that's what this looks like. So how that actually works is there is a forum post which I'll link below. Basically, I have some custom CSS here in the HTML element, which is applying this scroll snap type to the repeating group. So all of those recipes here, which by the way, I'm just pulling out random results from the Spoonacular API. The actual logic to hook up with the input values isn't set up yet, but at any rate, it's just giving me some data to work from that's actual real data, so that's useful. So the repeating group here is having this scroll snap type CSS applied here. And that's been applied via this overflow class, which I'm assigning to the repeating group using the classify plugin here. So classify plugin dictates that you add classes with this syntax here. So that's giving the repeating group this this class, and then the group inside is having, I'm not applying it with a class, just an ID here. It's having an ID assigned, which is a couple of things are happening. This class here, which has this CSS assigned, this is what you apply to the children elements of the repeating group that you want the snappy behavior to be applied to. So that's this group recipe. How am I doing this? Swipe detect is the ID, and yet group item is the, it doesn't matter. There's a couple, there's another step to this, which is that whenever that repeating group is visible, I am running some JavaScript, which is going to be what can detect that swipe up and swipe down behavior. And unfortunately, I could add this whole script within an HTML element, but a limitation that I came across was that Bubble doesn't assign these IDs to elements until they're visible. And that means that any script that I put inside this HTML element is going to load when the page is loaded. But if there isn't a ID or a class via that classify plugin being assigned, rather, if the element where that class or that ID is being applied isn't visible on page load, then the script isn't going to be able to pick it up. The script isn't going to be able to identify it. So I actually have to run that script when that repeating group is actually visible. And so, yeah, this is basically some JavaScript that's going to detect the direction that the user is swiping in and essentially trigger a button click for one of these elements. I have left and right, even though I'm not using them. But it's basically going to detect, it's going to trigger a button is clicked event for either this button swipe up or the button swipe down. And that is what I am then using to show either the previous or the next item in that repeating group. And you can see I've actually disabled this workflow. Can someone explain this to me? That disable workflow doesn't work. It just simply doesn't work. Like, it clearly was working even when it was disabled. So that's a bit odd. So without kind of boring you anymore with the details, that's the high level of what's going on here, which just hopefully useful for some of you to get a better sense for what can be done with UX on mobile. Because I want this to be an intuitive mobile app, not just like a web app that's just happens to be wrapped for mobile. So I obviously still have a bunch of work to do here. I'm still designing it roughly as I go. I've still got to hook up the API with those inputs. I've got to then actually create my own Bubble database to save users' recipes and have some basic user account stuff. But this was at least the main kind of chunk of work that I wanted to do. What comes next will be, well, I want to have a UI where a user can basically swipe on this card to flip it over, or at least kind of see a reverse side in essence, where they can actually just see the whole recipe with the ingredients and that kind of thing. Because this isn't really enough information for me as a connoisseur of food, let's say, to make a decision on whether I want to eat this or not. And this expensive, the API returns like a cheap yes or no parameter, and so far they're all expensive. So it also returns like a price for each item. So I think I'm going to use that instead moving forward. So anyway, that is long enough, but hopefully some useful stuff in here for you. Take care. See you next time.